The banquet hall glittered like a palace, its chandeliers casting golden rivers of light over tables dressed in ivory linen. The air carried the scent of roasted duck and jasmine tea, but beneath the finery pulsed a current of expectation. Dignitaries, investors, and politicians filled the room, their conversations subdued, their eyes fixed on the guest of honor. Liang Wei entered with the quiet authority of a man accustomed to being the axis around which events turned. At his side walked Thomas, dressed not in his janitor's uniform but in a simple suit provided at Liang Wei's request. The contrast was stark. A man once invisible now carried himself with a dignity that could not be denied. At the far end of the room, Robert adjusted his bow tie with trembling fingers. He had rehearsed endlessly, whispering phrases in Mandarin until his throat ached. Tonight was his last chance. If he could impress Liang Wei, perhaps the shame of the past days could be washed away. If he failed, the whispers of incompetence would become open derision. His eyes darted to Thomas, and envy coiled within him like a snake. The evening began with pleasantries. Speeches were delivered in English, toasts raised with polished smiles. But when the moment came to formally welcome Liang Wei, Robert seized it. Rising from his seat, he raised his glass and cleared his throat. The room quieted. He looked directly at the billionaire and began to speak in Mandarin. The words came haltingly, the tones skewed, his pronunciation mangled. He believed himself delivering a dignified greeting, but to those who understood, it was a jumble, nonsensical, almost comical. A few Chinese guests stifled chuckles behind their napkins. Liang Wei's brow furrowed, though his expression held no anger, only disappointment. The silence stretched, pressing against Robert like a vice. He faltered, his voice trailing into uncertainty. In the corner of his vision he saw Thomas stand, and panic surged. He wanted no rescue, yet he knew none could save him from himself. Thomas stepped forward with calm assurance. In flawless Mandarin, he addressed the room, offering a greeting so elegant and precise it seemed poetry itself. His words spoke of unity, respect, and the bridging of cultures. The guests nodded, their faces brightening. Liang Wei's expression softened into a smile, and he raised his glass in acknowledgement. The room erupted in applause. Robert sat down heavily, his humiliation complete. His glass trembled in his hand, the wine within quivering as though mocking him. He had gambled everything on a performance he could not deliver, and now he was exposed for what he truly was, a man who valued appearances over substance. The evening unfolded with Thomas at the center. He translated Liang Wei's address with precision, ensuring not only words but intent were carried across the language divide. He guided discussions with investors, smoothed misunderstandings before they could bloom, and infused every exchange with quiet authority. To the guests, he was no longer a hotel employee. He was a bridge, a cultural envoy, a man of substance. Robert watched, his bitterness dissolving into a hollow ache. The staff who once bowed to his every command now looked toward Thomas with admiration. He realized, too late, that respect was never seized by title but earned through character. When the final toast had been made and the hall began to empty, Liang Wei rose. His cane struck the floor lightly as he signaled for silence. In Mandarin, his voice carried with clarity, though Thomas translated for the wider audience. "When I arrived here," Liang Wei said, "I was met with silence where understanding should have been. I was prepared to be disappointed. But then a man, whom none of you expected, spoke to me in my own tongue. He did not serve me with pretense, but with truth. That man is Thomas." Gasps and murmurs swept the hall. Liang Wei continued, his eyes fixed on the janitor who had become his equal. "In him I found respect, knowledge, and sincerity, qualities no wealth can purchase. This city, and this hotel, should know that greatness does not always arrive in fine clothes or lofty titles. Sometimes it waits quietly, overlooked, until necessity calls it forth." Applause thundered through the hall, unrestrained and genuine. Thomas, overwhelmed, bowed his head. He had not sought recognition, yet it had found him, burning away the years of invisibility. His chest tightened with conflicting emotions: gratitude, sorrow for the past, and a fragile hope for the future. Then came the moment that sealed the night. Liang Wei turned to him and spoke in English, ensuring all understood. "I offer you a place at my side. Travel with me, advise me, help me build bridges where others only see walls. The world needs voices such as yours." The words fell like thunder in Robert's ears. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white, but he could not speak. His defeat was total. Thomas looked around the hall, the faces of guests, the stunned expressions of colleagues, even the haunted eyes of Robert. Slowly he nodded. "I accept, sir." His voice was steady, though inside his heart beat with disbelief. He had spent years scrubbing floors, burying his past, but now the door to a new life had opened wide. The banquet concluded with celebration, but Robert remained seated long after others departed, staring at the empty glass in his hand. For him, the night marked an ending. For Thomas, it marked a beginning. Later, as the lobby quieted and the glitter of the banquet faded, Thomas lingered by the marble floor he had so often polished. The chandeliers reflected his silhouette, not as a servant bent in obscurity but as a man who had found his voice. He ran his fingers briefly across the cool stone, a silent farewell to the years spent in shadows. Outside, the convoy awaited. Liang Wei's presence was steady at his side. Together they stepped toward the doors, the future unfolding beyond them. Behind, Robert watched silently from the mezzanine, his expression unreadable, though his eyes betrayed the truth: envy, regret, and the bitter knowledge that he had been measured and found wanting. As Thomas crossed the threshold, the night air sharp against his skin, he breathed deeply, feeling the weight of years lift from his shoulders. For the first time in a long time, the path ahead was not imposed but chosen. The man who had once been overlooked now stood at the center of his own story, his worth undeniable. And the hotel, which had once seen him only as a shadow, would remember forever the night a janitor answered in perfect Chinese and changed everything. Robert could not shake the humiliation. The image of Liang Wei ignoring him in favor of Thomas replayed endlessly in his mind, each memory more cutting than the last. He had imagined his career elevated by the billionaire's visit, his reputation burnished in the eyes of the board, but instead he had been reduced to a bystander in his own hotel. Worse still, the staff whispered when they thought he could not hear, their glances no longer deferential but questioning, as though wondering why a man so incompetent held authority when another, hidden in plain sight, possessed the very skill the moment demanded. That evening, Liang Wei summoned Thomas to a private dinner. Robert attempted to object, citing scheduling concerns, but the billionaire brushed aside his interruptions with effortless disdain, speaking directly to Thomas in Mandarin. The invitation was not a request. It was an order wrapped in courtesy. Robert, forced to concede, lingered outside the dining hall while Thomas entered. He strained to hear through the heavy doors but caught only muffled cadences, the rhythm of voices rising and falling in harmony. His jaw clenched at the thought of a janitor seated at the table where men of power dined while he, the manager, stood irrelevant in the hallway. Inside, Thomas sat across from Liang Wei, the table set with lacquered dishes and polished silver. The billionaire regarded him not as a servant but as a man of intellect. He asked about Thomas's years in Beijing, his favorite poets, even his impressions of China's transformation in the last decade. Thomas answered with measured honesty, weaving personal anecdotes with cultural insight. He spoke of teaching English at a small university, of evenings spent debating philosophy with Chinese colleagues, of crowded markets where language itself felt alive. His eyes softened when he mentioned leaving that life behind, and though he did not elaborate, Liang Wei's discerning gaze caught the shadow of pain beneath the words. "You should not be here pushing a mop," the billionaire said, his Mandarin blunt yet not unkind. "A man who speaks as you do belongs on a different stage." Thomas inclined his head respectfully, though his heart tightened. Life has its turns, sir. Sometimes the path is chosen for us. Liang Wei studied him for a long moment, then let the matter rest. Still, his regard carried weight, and Thomas felt it deeply. Robert's resentment grew with each passing day. Everywhere he turned, Thomas was there beside Liang Wei, guiding him through meetings, dinners, and cultural encounters. Guests who once sought Robert's attention now watched the unlikely interpreter with admiration. Even the staff, once indifferent to Thomas, treated him with a subtle deference, their greetings warmer, their glances lingering with newfound respect. It was intolerable. In the privacy of his office, Robert raged. He hurled his pen across the desk, cursing under his breath. "A maid," he spat, as if the word itself were poison. "A maid is stealing my place." He scrolled through staff records, searching for some blemish to weaponize, some discrediting detail. Yet Thomas's file was maddeningly clean. Punctual, hard-working, no complaints. It was as though the man had deliberately hidden all traces of his past, a phantom revealed only by accident. At last Robert confronted him one evening in the empty lobby. The chandeliers had dimmed, the guests retired to their rooms, and only the faint hum of the city beyond the glass doors filled the silence. Thomas was polishing the marble floor when Robert approached, his voice sharp. "You think you've fooled everyone, don't you?" he hissed. "Parading that language, making me look a fool." Thomas straightened slowly, setting aside the cloth. His face remained calm, though his eyes held a quiet strength. "I did not intend to make you a fool, Mr. Hensley. I only spoke because silence would have disgraced us all." Robert's fists clenched at his sides. "You're nothing but a cleaner. Don't forget that. This hotel doesn't pay you to play the scholar." Thomas's expression did not waver. He spoke with measured conviction. "Languages do not belong to titles or uniforms. They belong to those who respect them enough to learn. I have spent years with your language, just as I did with Mandarin. Neither has made me less of a man nor more. But perhaps they have made me useful." The words struck Robert harder than any shout. For a moment he could find no reply, only the echo of his own bitterness resounding within him. He turned abruptly, muttering curses as he stalked back to his office. But the confrontation left its mark, his resentment festering now with open venom. Meanwhile, Liang Wei's appreciation for Thomas deepened. During a meeting with local investors, he requested Thomas remain at his side, translating not only words but the subtleties of tone and intention. The investors were impressed. Some even mistook Thomas for a cultural attaché rather than a hotel employee. Liang Wei, noticing their surprise, allowed the misconception to linger, a subtle acknowledgement of the man's worth. Yet Thomas carried his role with humility. When praised, he deflected. When questioned about his background, he offered only fragments. In truth, he feared the weight of exposure. He had left Beijing not in triumph but in retreat, drawn home by tragedy and bound by circumstance to a life far smaller than he had once imagined. Each conversation with Liang Wei reminded him of what he had lost, even as it hinted at what might still be possible. The tension reached its height the night before the grand banquet. Robert, desperate to reclaim dignity, practiced Mandarin phrases alone in his office. He repeated greetings, mangling tones, his voice cracking with frustration. He imagined the astonished faces when he addressed Liang Wei directly, forcing the billionaire to acknowledge him. The fantasy burned in him like fuel, yet beneath it lay fear. If he failed, his humiliation would be absolute. Thomas, unaware of Robert's rehearsals, sat quietly in the staff quarters, penning notes in Mandarin characters on scraps of paper. His hand moved steadily, the act a meditation. He thought of his younger brother, long gone, whose dreams had once mirrored his own. He thought of his mother's weary smile, of promises made and broken. The banquet loomed not as an opportunity but as a reminder that his life stood at a crossroads he had not chosen. When dawn broke, the city stirred with anticipation. The banquet would gather dignitaries, investors and politicians, all eager to bask in Liang Wei's presence. For Robert, it was the last chance to salvage pride. For Thomas, it was a test he had not sought but could not avoid. The paths of both men, so different in aim and spirit, now converged upon a single night that would decide not only their futures but the unspoken truth of where true worth resided. The silence after Liang Wei's outburst was unbearable. Robert's lips parted but no sound came. His mind a whirlwind of excuses that would never bridge the chasm of language. The staff shifted in anxious half-steps, their eyes darting between the furious guest and the paralyzed manager. The lobby, moments before a shrine of opulence, now felt like a stage collapsing beneath its actors. Then, from the periphery, a calm voice threaded through the tension. Measured, fluent, unhesitating Mandarin. The words came from Thomas. He had stepped forward, his mop set aside. His posture unassuming but his tone resonant with clarity. His voice was not loud, yet it carried with authority, each syllable pronounced with the precision of a scholar. The effect was immediate. Liang Wei froze mid-breath, his sharp gaze snapping toward the source. The billionaire studied Thomas as if the world had shifted beneath him. The janitor, the invisible man in a faded uniform, had spoken the language of emperors as though it were his own. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Robert blinked in disbelief, his confusion almost comical as he mouthed the impossible. The receptionists leaned forward. The bellboys exchanged stunned glances. Even passing guests slowed their steps as though to witness a spectacle. Liang Wei, recovering first, narrowed his eyes and spoke in Mandarin, his tone wary, testing. He delivered a rapid string of phrases, laced with idioms unfamiliar even to many native speakers. It was a challenge, a probe to expose fraud. Thomas did not falter. He responded with equal swiftness, his cadence fluid, his answers imbued with elegance. He spoke not only as one fluent but as one who understood the weight of cultural nuance. The billionaire's expression shifted. The irritation that had burned moments before softened into curiosity, then into something resembling admiration. His cane no longer struck the floor but tapped lightly as though in thought. "You are not Chinese," Liang Wei remarked in Mandarin, his tone less accusation than inquiry. Thomas bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect learned long ago. "No, sir. But I lived in Beijing for many years. Your tongue is not foreign to me." The words carried more than meaning. They carried dignity. In that instant, Thomas was no longer a shadow in the hotel lobby. He was a man unveiled, his presence undeniable. The staff gawked in astonishment, struggling to reconcile the humble cleaner they had known with the poised interpreter standing before them. Robert tried to recover ground, forcing a brittle laugh. "Yes, yes, of course," he said in English, hoping to redirect attention. "Mr. Thomas, he helps us sometimes." But Liang Wei did not look at him. His focus remained fixed on Thomas, who had already become the center of the exchange. "Tell me," Liang Wei continued in Mandarin, "what do you know of the Analects?" Thomas's eyes brightened. Without hesitation he quoted, in the original tongue, Confucius's line about respect being the foundation of governance. The billionaire's lips twitched, the faintest smile tugging at his austere demeanor. He pressed further, asking about Tang poetry, modern economics, even the shifting tides of East-West relations. Each time Thomas answered with ease, weaving knowledge with humility. He did not flaunt his mastery but revealed it like a craftsman displaying hidden skill only when pressed. The lobby had transformed into an arena where only two men mattered, the billionaire and the janitor who spoke as his equal. The staff stood in silence, the awe on their faces betraying how little they had ever known of Thomas's inner world. For Robert the moment was torture. Each word in Mandarin was a reminder of his own inadequacy, each exchange a nail hammered into the coffin of his authority. He had prepared to dazzle Liang Wei with extravagant gestures, yet here was Thomas dismantling his plans with nothing more than words. Worse still, Robert realized the guest no longer needed him. The conversation flowed naturally without his input. Thomas remained composed, though beneath his calm exterior a storm churned. It had been years since he had spoken the language so openly. Memories stirred, Beijing streets alive with neon and chatter, professors who had encouraged him, friends who had treated him as family despite his foreignness. He had buried that chapter of his life beneath the drudgery of mops and buckets, believing no one here would ever value it. Now, unexpectedly, the past rose like a tide to meet him. Liang Wei's demeanor warmed further, his questions softening into conversation. He gestured toward the marble hall, speaking of architecture, of how the patterns reminded him of Shanghai's Bund. Thomas responded with insight, comparing the cultural echoes of East and West, how design carried the soul of a people. The billionaire chuckled, a sound that seemed almost impossible minutes before, then clapped Thomas lightly on the shoulder in approval. Robert swallowed hard, his palms damp. He attempted once more to insert himself, stepping closer with a strained grin. "Perhaps we can, arrange for refreshments," he said, but the suggestion fell flat. Liang Wei gave no reply in English, instead instructing Thomas in Mandarin to accompany him during his stay. The message was clear. Robert was irrelevant. A murmur rippled through the staff. They had never seen their manager so thoroughly eclipsed. The hierarchy had been overturned in the span of minutes. The billionaire spoke to the janitor as to a confidant, while the manager lingered on the margins, diminished. Thomas inclined his head respectfully, hiding the conflict rising within him. He had not sought this spotlight, had not longed for recognition in such a public form. Yet he felt something stir in his chest, a long-buried pride awakening. His life had been reduced to anonymity, but here stood a man of power acknowledging him for what he was: capable, learned, worthy. The conversation lingered until Liang Wei, satisfied, turned toward the elevators. His entourage followed, but not before the billionaire announced, through Thomas, that he would prefer this man as his interpreter for the duration of his stay. Gasps echoed softly from the staff. Robert's face drained of color, his lips twitching as if to protest, yet no words emerged. When the elevator doors closed, the lobby remained suspended in silence. Only then did the staff exhale, as though waking from a dream. Eyes drifted toward Thomas, no longer with dismissal but with reverence. Robert stared at him with a mixture of disbelief and resentment, the fragile order of his world unsettled. Thomas bent quietly, retrieved his mop, and returned it to the bucket. But the air had changed. The marble floor, gleaming as ever, now reflected a different truth, that greatness had been hiding in plain sight, and the balance of power had shifted forever. The marble lobby gleamed beneath the morning light, chandeliers scattering brilliance across polished floors as if the entire hotel had been groomed for judgment. Robert Hensley paced the length of the reception desk, his shoes clicking with nervous insistence, his tie too tight around his throat. He was a man who believed in appearances, who measured success in smiles rehearsed and handshakes firm. Yet on this day, every detail seemed to mock him: the misplaced vase of orchids, the crooked angle of a bellhop's cap, the faint smudge on the glass door that no amount of polishing could erase. Word had arrived 2 hours earlier. Liang Wei, the Chinese billionaire whose name carried weight like thunder, was en route. The man had built an empire on technology and precision, and now he would be stepping through Robert's domain. This was not just another guest. This was a chance for the hotel to secure prestige, influence, and wealth. Failure, Robert told himself, was not an option. And yet failure was precisely what he feared. The staff sensed his agitation. Bellboys straightened their spines. The receptionist rehearsed her smile in the reflection of the brass counter. The elevator operator, usually sluggish with boredom, stood rigid as though anticipating inspection. Among them moved Thomas, the quiet janitor in a faded uniform, mop bucket rattling at his side. He had been invisible for years, a fixture of the hotel's backdrop, sweeping up cigarette ash outside the entrance or scrubbing the marble corners no guest bothered to notice. Robert barely acknowledged him beyond curt instructions, though today he muttered, "Make sure that floor shines. We're not hosting a farmer's market." Thomas gave a single nod, his eyes steady, then bent to his work. The rumble of engines grew outside. Through the glass doors came a convoy, sleek black cars that reflected the city like mirrors. The doorman rushed forward, pulling open the handles with exaggerated flourish. Out stepped Liang Wei. He was not tall, but his presence stretched higher than the ceiling. His suit was cut to perfection, his hair combed with meticulous care, his stride measured yet commanding. He looked neither left nor right, only forward, as though the entire building bent toward him. Robert plastered on his most confident smile and stepped forward, hands extended. "Mr. Wei, welcome." But the words died. Liang Wei spoke first, his voice smooth yet clipped, syllables falling sharp as blades. Mandarin clear and unwavering. The lobby stilled. The bellboys glanced at one another helplessly. The receptionist's painted smile faltered. Robert froze, his English greeting hanging useless in the air. He recognized none of the words. He had studied enough in advance to know the cadence, but not the meaning. Liang Wei's brow twitched with impatience. He repeated himself slower, his eyes narrowing as though daring someone to prove capable. Robert attempted a nervous laugh, gesturing broadly, but his own ignorance weighed heavier with each passing second. I'm sorry, sir," Robert stammered in English, hoping tone might bridge the gulf. "Perhaps if—" Liang Wei cut him off with another flow of Mandarin, the syllables biting, demanding. He tapped his cane against the marble floor, the sound ringing like a gavel. The staff shifted uneasily, the atmosphere thickening into dread. Robert's heart pounded. He imagined the board hearing of this disaster, the headline of humiliation spreading like wildfire, the hotel that could not serve its most distinguished guest. He swallowed, sweat slicking the back of his neck. He had no translator, no plan, nothing but an unraveling performance. The billionaire's words sharpened further, frustration evident in every clipped syllable. His eyes glinted with disdain, as though concluding that the Western hospitality promised to him was a hollow mask. Robert raised his hands as if to plead, but the language barrier mocked him, every attempt collapsing into silence. At the edge of the scene, Thomas had paused his mopping, his dark eyes steady, his lips pressed in thought. Yet he remained still, a shadow against the grandeur, unnoticed as always. Robert did not look his way, too consumed by the fear that everything he had built would crumble in these few unbearable seconds. Liang Wei lifted his cane and struck it against the marble with force. The crack echoed through the vast lobby, reverberating off the crystal chandeliers. Guests passing through stopped mid-step. The staff seemed to shrink back as if chastised. In Mandarin, Liang Wei thundered what none could understand. Was this truly the best America could offer? The question hung in the air, foreign yet heavy, and though its meaning escaped them, its scorn was undeniable. Robert's stomach turned to stone. His throat tightened. The career he had fought for felt as though it might shatter beneath that single glare. And in the silence that followed, every pair of eyes fixed upon him, waiting to see whether he would collapse or conjure a miracle. The marble floor gleamed, Thomas's mop resting against the bucket, unnoticed in the corner. Something was about to break, though none yet knew in whose favor.